Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of August of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with Crimea, but not with Crimean bridge. I'll remind you that, as we discussed in the previous video, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during this night, the previous night at the local time, the Ukrainians made massive attack with drones against the territory of Crimea. The Russians reported that there were around 20 drones that were involved in that operation. 14 of them were shot down by the Russian air defense, 6 of them were just shot down by the Russian electronic warfare. So that was the first attack, and the Ukrainians were trying to test and to stress the Russian air defense. Probably the Ukrainians wanted to force the Russians to use as much as possible missiles against those drones, because somewhere at 3 p.m. of the local time, at 1 p.m. of the local time, the Ukrainians made another massive missile attack, but against the Russian Crimean bridge. The Russians reported that around 1 p.m. of the local time, the Ukrainians attacked Crimean bridge with the two S-200 missiles that were upgraded to the types that can be used against the ground positions. And after that we got a video of a smoke on the bridge, and the Ukrainian sources started saying that the bridge was destroyed one more time, that few parts of the bridge fell down to the sea. But basically the Russians reported that the bridge is okay, nothing happened with the bridge, and that was just like smoke barrier. New tactics. The Russians start using new tactics when anything attacks bridge. The Russians launch the smoke barrier, trying to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities to control and to see the situation. Probably not just to control to see, but also to coordinate missiles or drones that are flying in direction of Crimea bridge. Anyway, the situation is normal. The Russians have restored the possibility for cars to move along the bridge. The situation is stable, and the Ukrainians couldn't achieve the goals they're probably planning to do, so like to destroy the bridge. Now moving to the situation to the ground. When talking about Kherson area and the Battle of Kherson, as we discussed, the Ukrainians managed to establish a small foothold in the vicinity of Казачье лагеря. We still haven't received any updates about whether the Russians were able to force the Ukrainians to step back or not. But anyway, as a result of fierce clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 35 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system, and 1 radar INTPQ-36. Now we're moving further, and we're going to talk about Kupiansk, Orekhov, about the Zaporizhzhia area. Today we got a lot of updates from this bridgehead, and the first updates are coming from Kupiansk. As we discussed probably a few days ago, that currently the Ukrainians are not active in this direction, and the Russians probably see this, and they understand that the Ukrainians basically don't have enough of manpower to continue the offensive operation in this area as well, because during the previous attacks in the vicinity of Zherebyanki, when the Ukrainians were trying to attack the settlement from the north along the road, the Ukrainians were completely defeated and lost a lot of manpower. So basically currently the Ukrainians are in defense states, and they try just to hold their positions along the yellow line, while the main Ukrainian forces are trying to attack in the vicinity of Zaporizhzhia, in the vicinity of Orekhov, in the Bradley Square. The Russians see the situation. During the previous few days, the Russians published a lot of videos of bombings and shelling of the Ukrainian positions, and today we got another video how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Kupiansk, and as a result of mortar fire, that position was destroyed on the north of Kupiansk. That was probably another ammo depot of Ukrainian forces. So as you can see, the Russians are very active in this area, and this is the situation when the Ukrainians have their positions. They got the positions, but because of probably better equipment of Russian forces, they can see and control the Ukrainians, and that's why they're attacking them every day. And every day the Ukrainians have more and more losses on this bridgehead. Probably the Russians doing some kind of artillery preparation, and maybe there is a very high chances that in a week or two, in a month, the Russians will counterattack and they will try to force the Ukrainians to step back from this bridgehead. Now we are moving further to the Bradley Square. Today we got also a lot of updates from this territory. As you can see, we have added a lot of icons in this area. Starting this morning, the Ukrainians made probably already 2 or 3 waves of attacks in direction of this small salient, in direction of these fields. And one attack, 100% sure, was made in direction of Robotina itself. The Ukrainians were attacking mainly from the north with two different like waves. One of the waves were moving along the road in direction of the northern part of Robotina. Another wave was made in direction of through the fields in direction of the eastern part of Robotina. And today the Ukrainians, for example, published another video of unsuccessful probably evacuation or rotation process of Ukrainian forces. As you can see in this video, the Ukrainian armored vehicle got the positions, and after that you see that the Russians were bombing and shelling this area with artillery. The Ukrainians tried probably to make some barrier, smoke barrier, but maybe they didn't have enough of weapon for these purposes or equipment. And at some point we see that Ukrainian soldiers, a lot of Ukrainian soldiers started landing and packing in the Bradley. And after the Ukrainians finished this process, they start running away, and another group of Ukrainian forces arrived. So one group was taken, another group was returned back. And right after the Bradley left these positions, the Russians start bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions and trenches. So just a few seconds and the Bradley could be destroyed as well. Also, the Ukrainians launched another wave of attack, but currently the Ukrainians are trying to develop their positions on the south of Mala Takhmachka, to be more precise on the south, and in direction between Novopokrovka and Verbovo. So currently, this is the main Ukrainian direction of attack, not even Robotina. Currently, the Ukrainians are trying to develop their bridgehead and just to increase the area of control between like Zaporizhzhia, Mala Takhmachka, Robotina, Verbovo, and Novopokrovka. So this is the main direction of Ukrainian attack. And the Russians mainly reports about those attacks starting this day. And for example, by this evening of the local time, the Ukrainians involved around 10 armored vehicles and a lot of infantry in attack in these directions. We haven't received still the numbers and the results of that attack, but as I understand, another bloody suicide operation from the Ukrainian side. Furthermore, today the Russians published the video how they managed to discover the Ukrainian positions in Mala Takhmachka. The author of this video claims that that was some kind of operational headquarters of probably of those forces who were involved in the operation in the vicinity of in direction of Verbovo. The Russians discovered that headquarters at head center, and after that the Russians made a massive artillery strike, and as a result of that strike the building was destroyed, the vehicles of Ukrainian soldiers and forces were damaged, and probably the entire building was burned, and probably the Ukrainians were forced to leave these positions, probably to change their positions to another building. So that situation took place on the north of, let's say, Bradley Square in the vicinity of Mala Takhmachka. Furthermore, the Russians published also a lot of videos of drone strikes of the Ukrainians or against Ukrainian positions in the fields between two main directions of attack. As you can see, the Ukrainians one more time are trying to attack in two global directions. The first one from Novodanilovka to the south of Robotina. This is the first direction. The Ukrainians managed to achieve some success and they managed to enter the northern part of Robotina. The second direction is from Mala Takhmachka between Novopokrovka and Verbovo. This is the second direction. But the very important positions the Ukrainians have along this line. So basically they control this territory. This is the main Ukrainian defense belt, and the purpose of this defense belt is not to allow the Russians to attack between these two waves of attacks, between these two waves of Ukrainian directions, so not to allow to prevent any attacks from the Russian side in this direction. So basically this is like the base stronghold of the Ukrainians, which they use to coordinate and to control two directions of attack on the west and on the east of this bridgehead. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in Zaporizhzhia area, the Ukrainians lost around 40 soldiers and 9 armored vehicles, including 5 tanks. Also, the Russians reported they managed to repel 3 attacks and mainly of 46 Air Mobile Brigade. This 46th Brigade that was recently redeployed in this area from Kherson direction, from the process of, like say, fulfilling process. Now we're moving to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, and we got a lot of updates from this area as well. The Ukrainians continue their attacks from Staromayorska. They managed to create pontoon bridge across the Mokry Yala River, and currently they have possibility to send infantry to attack the Russians in the southern and the central part of that settlement. Furthermore, the Ukrainians increased the pressure on the northern part, and for example, today, as we discussed in the previous video, the Ukrainians managed to penetrate the local operational defense belt inside the settlement and to force the Russians to step back as far as possible from the northern area to the central and to the southern. And this is a very interesting situation. And the situation with Vremivka tactical bridgehead and Urozhaina is tightly connected with the situation with the Ukrainian air forces and the Russian missile strikes that took place during the previous days. For example, today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that on the 11th of August, the Russians made massive missile strike against the aircraft field that located in the settlement by the name of Crimea. This is the settlement, and this is the airfield that was under Russian attack, this one. And the Russians are saying that as a result of that attack, they managed to achieve the goals they were planning to achieve. So basically everything is successful. So, but you know that the Russians are not attacking airfields for nothing. Usually the Russians attacks the Ukrainians airfields the next day or during the next, let's say, 24 hours after the Ukrainians use their Su-24 aircrafts to attack Russian positions with Storm Shadows. So the Russians, when the Ukrainians, all these aircrafts, as we discussed, the Ukrainians are not keeping all their aircrafts that can use Storm Shadow missiles in the western part of Ukraine. Most of them are located in the territory of Poland or Romania or something like this. And this is the only time when the Russians are able to destroy these aircrafts. When they enter the territory of Ukraine, then they attack some Russian positions, and on their way back home, the Russians can attack them on some kind of aircraft field that they use for some kind of that they use to get some fuel or something like this. And yesterday the Russians attacked Crimea, but we haven't got any updates that Ukrainians were using Storm Shadow missiles or something like this against the Russian positions. And that was a very big question to me, because I was searching the answer to this question. And today the Ukrainians probably published the answer to that question. And that answer came to us from Vremivka tactical bridgehead. And this is there were at least two videos from Urozhaina, and this is the video of usage of JDAM bombs by the Ukrainians. So in this video we see one explosion, then another. The author of this video claims that Ukrainians were using JDAM bombs against the Russian positions in Urozhaina on the 8th of August, right exactly before a day when the Ukrainians managed to penetrate the first defense belt of the Russians in that settlement, and basically to capture the northern part and the southwestern part of that settlement. So this is the usage of JDAM bomb. Another video from another point angle: the Russian soldiers were moving along the Urozhaina settlement. Probably they were getting some munition, some ammo. They were making some kind of positions, walking just around the city and so on. So they were doing the military stuff and so on. And the Ukrainians were following. And as soon as the Russians got inside the building, a lot of infantry, basically the Ukrainians managed to discover probably some main Russian base where they keep a lot of forces, a lot of soldiers during some not fighting period of time. And after that, the Ukrainians destroyed that building using JDAM bombs. So basically, as I understand, the Ukrainians managed to destroy the Russian operational reserves, and after that they launched that attack, and as a result of that attack they managed to penetrate the edge defense belt around the city. And that was the purpose, the reason why the Russians destroyed and attacked that airfield in the western part of Ukraine, because the Ukrainians were using those JDAM, those aircrafts that were able to attack the Russians with JDAM. But this is not the only problem. Another video was published by the Ukrainians that they attacked Novopetrikovka, this settlement, also using the JDAM bomb. And this, the first episode of the video we've just seen, took place exactly in this settlement. And as you can see, Novopetrikovka is located very far from the combat line, and basically the distance between this settlement to, let's say, the area where from Velika Novosilovka is around 25 kilometers. Just a second. So as you can see, the distance is very heavy. is very big, 25 kilometers. And as I see, somehow probably during the previous, I have like two explanations. The first one is that somehow during the previous clashes in this area, counter-artillery duels or something like this, the Ukrainians managed to suppress the Russian air defense system and maybe something else, and the Russians basically couldn't see the Ukrainians' aircrafts, probably MiG-29 or Su-24 that the Ukrainians were using for those strikes. And the second version that I have is maybe the Western countries have upgraded the Ukrainian aircrafts to be invisible for Russian air defense. Anyway, these two cases are very bad for the Russians if the Ukrainians can use these bombs, JDAM bombs, on the combat line, because it's, of course, it's a game changer. If infantry, like Ukrainian infantry, has possibility to have such a support from their air forces as JDAM bombs, of course, it's a game changer that will force the Russians to continue stepping back, withdrawing their positions until at least they'll find a solution how to destroy the Ukrainian aircrafts. Maybe as a result of missile strike that took place during the previous days in the western part of Ukraine managed to solve this issue for the Russians, but who knows. Anyway, we'll see and we'll follow this situation, whether the Russians were able to destroy those aircraft that Ukraine were using or not. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in the South Donetsk area, the Ukrainians lost 130 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, including 1 tank. The Russians managed to repel 2 attacks in Rozhaine. For now, the settlement, part of the settlement, still remains under Russian control. We'll see what is going to happen tomorrow, of course. Now we are moving to probably the most interesting part of the front line to me. As we discussed, most of the people are famous of like Orekhov, Bradley Square, Vremivka, Kupiansk, but you know that I have two my famous front lines, two my favorite areas, and the first one is Mykhailivka and the second one is Krasnogorovka, because as I see, the Russians have some plans about this territory, regarding these territories. They're trying to implement a very interesting operation that probably will ruin the Ukrainian plans of Vremivka, of offensive operation in the direction of Vremivka. And first we're going to talk about Mykhailivka. We will increase the number of updates that we got from the second half of July. As you can see, the Russians attacked this area heavily. Just yesterday we discussed that the Russians started their offensive operation from the south in direction of the southern stronghold of Mykhailivka, and the Russians were bombing and attacking the settlement, this area from the south, trying to destroy and to suppress Ukrainian forces in that stronghold. Also, we discussed that the Russians have already attacked and bombed the Ukrainian positions along the along these forest lines, and we expected that the Russians will launch another wave of attack from the north. And today we got the first video confirmation that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to return control over this stronghold, over these fortifications on the north. This is this area that was taken by the Russians already, that had been taken by the Russians already a few months ago, but then the Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to return back that area. And today, after a small operational pause, the Russians launched their counter-offensive operation one more time, and the Ukrainians lost their positions and they have significant number of losses. So basically, as you can see, the Russians continue their encirclement operation of this settlement, of not the encirclement but establishing of operational encirclement of that area. And I see that according to updates we see, the Ukrainians don't have possibility to counterfight the Russians. We haven't received from the Western countries any evidence of counter drone attacks, of counter artillery duels, just few updates from the area between Stepnoye and Olenikovka, but as you can see, this is not enough to slow down and to stop the Russians who are advancing in the direction of the settlement. If the Russians can take Mykhailivka, if let's say if the Russians can capture this territory, and they will I believe that they're doing exactly what I'm saying, then the entire front line in this area will be collapsed, and the forces of Ugledar, Vadiana, Konstantinovka, Pobeda, Marinka will collapse automatically. Nothing will be able to stop the Russians in direction from the east, let's say to the west. They will be able just to move further, and this is going to be a big disaster of the Ukrainians. And this is exactly what the Russians are trying to implement during the Ukrainian attacks in direction of Rozhaine. And the second area we discussed is my favorite area, is Krasnogorovka, another area where the Russians continue advancing, continue attacking. And for example, today we got the video how the Russians were bombing and hunting the Ukrainian positions with drones. Very interesting videos. Let's take a look at them. For example, on this video, the author of this video claims that the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian drone positions that the Ukrainians were using to attack the Russians in the vicinity of coal mine. So we remember how many problems the Ukrainians managed to deal to the Russians on the coal mine from these positions. The Russians discovered this is the squad of Sudoplatov, and after that the Russians started bombing the Ukrainian drone positions, which forced the Ukrainians to start running from this area. And they basically, of course, it was just an operation of when the Russians trying to suppress and to force the Ukrainians to start run away, because this position was discovered by the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainian soldiers realized that currently it's not very secure to stay there, and they changed their positions, and the Russians managed to discover another Ukrainian positions. And as you can see, there was at least 2 cars, equipment, drone equipment, and basically the Russians on this video shown us that they destroyed another Ukrainian like drone positions, a lot of equipment, and so on. And almost the same video we got on the northern part of on the north of railways. On this video we see another drone position of Ukrainian forces, and the Ukrainians from this building were trying to attack also the Russians somewhere in the vicinity of coal mine, or probably the northern flank of the settlement. The Russians discovered the Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian soldier, and after that they start bombing and attacking this area with drones. And there were a lot of attacks from the Russian side. The Russians used a significant number of drones, and basically they set the entire building on fire and forced the Ukrainians to change their position in this area as well. So basically almost the entire building was destroyed and burned by the regular drone from the Russian side. So the first wave was to establish by the Russian forces. The first thing that the Russians made is to establish positions on the southern corner of the settlement, and currently the Russians also are trying to implement and establish another position on the northern corner of the settlement. During the previous week, the Russians destroyed a lot of Ukrainian artillery systems in this area, including M777 howitzers. Just a second. For better understanding, you see that a lot of artillery systems were destroyed. The Russians also managed to shut down and to suppress the Ukrainian anti-tank positions. And currently the Russians get to another stage of upcoming possible offensive operation in Krasnogorovka. Currently the Russians are trying to suppress and to destroy the Ukrainian drone positions. And after that, when the Russians suppress artillery, anti-tank positions, drone positions, the Russians will start offensive operation and will be able to capture the settlement easily, as I see, according to the plans and according to my understanding of the situation. So my another favorite part of the front line. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 110 soldiers, 8 tanks and 8 armored vehicles and 2 tanks, and also 2 artillery systems. We continue receiving the videos from Avdiivka of usage of Russian guided bombs that we discussed in the previous video. When talking about Bakhmut, we haven't received almost nothing. The only update we got is that today at 9 a.m. of the local time, the Ukrainians made an attempt to storm the Russian positions in Andriivka using the infantry of 20 soldiers. That was just a small operation, probably reconnaissance in force or reconnaissance in combat, but the Russians managed to discover Ukrainian positions, to breed reserves, and to counterattack the Ukrainians. And as a result of that counterattack, the Ukrainians were forced to step back. So nothing special on the entire front line. The Ukrainians, after heaviest losses that took place during the previous days of clashes in the vicinity of water reservoir and Klishevka, continued their regrouping and so on. When talking about Lyman frontline and Siversk frontline, we also haven't received almost nothing. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 90 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles. The Russians managed to repel 3 attacks in the vicinity of Sergeyevka, and just a few videos of counter-artillery duels. The Ukrainians were bombing Dibrova with artillery systems. The Russians were bombing the Crimean forest with Grad systems, trying to destroy the Ukrainian manpower in the forest using the cluster rounds, regular rounds as well. So it was a massive attack. Probably some kind of preparation or clearing the passage for Russian infantry. And some videos we got from Sporna, the Russians. We stopped receiving videos from this area During the previous week, we got the videos just along the railways from Siversk to Vyimka, along this area, and now the Russians restarted their bombings of Sporna, another bones in the Russians' neck in this area. When talking about Kupiansk front line, we got also a lot of updates from this bridgehead. The Russians continued their offensive operation. The Minister of Defense reported that as a result of offensive operation using the broad front line attack, the Russians managed to improve their positions. The Ukrainians lost around 70 soldiers, but yet we haven't received any updates about the status of Sinkovka, whether the Russians were able to capture that settlement or not. The Russians reported that they repelled around 8 attacks from the Ukrainian side, and today the Russians published a very interesting video that I would like to also discuss with you. This is the video of Russian coordinate system, navigate or targeted system for artillery system by the name of GLASS or I. So on this video you can see how the Ukrainians were moving with their transport light vehicles to their positions, and the Russians were following the situation with drone. So that was like work of operator. Take a look at this interface. You're gonna see the screen of like the situation, and there is another screen on the bottom left corner, this one, with some kind of map and small target in the middle of the map. So what is this? The Russians have created a very interesting system to navigate their artillery systems, and they're doing like 3 strikes with Russian artillery system. We see that on this video we see the smoke, one smoke a little bit to the right of the blue circle in the center of the video, and on the left side. After that, after those 2 strikes, the Russians on the small corner on the left bottom corner put 2 points of the strikes of areas where the Russians artillery got. So basically the Russians were trying to attack and to hit the blue circle in the middle of the screen, and also we have the same blue circle on the small screen on the bottom left corner. And after that the Russians made 2 strikes. One artillery shell got to the right, another one to the left. The Russian operator put these 2 like explosions on the screen, and after that the system coordinated and calculated the normal like strike, and the 3rd strike was very accurate, and the Ukrainian machine or car was destroyed as a result of 3rd strike. So very interesting system. As I understand, this is not like the system that every single artillery squad from the Russian side have, but anyway the Russians currently, maybe this system still in some kind of test period of time, but as I understand, this is the future of artillery systems, the future of accurate shelling. And with these attacks you don't need also to use like Krasnopol, because Krasnopol is a guided shell that can be corrected during the fly. But now the Russians are trying to show this system that can use regular shells, but with a very smart navigation, very smart coordinates, when you can put like the points of strikes on the map, and the system try to coordinate itself for the next attack until the system gets the target. Very interesting situation. Furthermore, some Ukrainian sources reported about possible upcoming evacuation from Izium. If you remember, a few days ago the Ukrainians have announced about massive evacuation from the area of the combat line in the Kupiansk front line, where, as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers. And the sources are saying that the Ukrainians were planning to make bigger evacuation, but because of like political situation, the Ukrainians took a decision not to do this because of big consequences of that. So they took a decision to stretch this process in time. The first evacuation was announced in the vicinity in the Kupiansk front line, and also the Ukrainians are planning to expand this evacuation process further up to the settlement of Izium that used to be under Russian control during, let's say, the first phase of the special military operation. And we got some videos, of course, from the border, how the Ukrainians and the Russians were bombing and attacking each other. And the Minister of Defense reported that at 6 p.m. of the local time, the Ukrainians made another attempt to attack the territory of Russian Federation with drones, and all of them were shot down by the Russian air defense. And probably that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.